I've been thinking about disruption. My tendency is to work within the system to promote change, while also acknowledging that the system itself is resistant to change. Any system, all systems. We all know our world has been rocked these last few years, disrupted by forces of chaos and disease. And how have we responded? There's a lot more to say about the coming together and tearing apart of the COVID and Twitter years, but mostly we've gone back to business as usual. If a disruption like these last few years can't create lasting change in who we are and how we treat each other, then what can? Because I do still believe, I think I have to believe it, faithfully, like a religion, that we can. We need something different. We are no longer trying to fit a square peg, our collective selves, into the round hole of our society as we've organized it. Now we're trying to fit stars and rhombuses, heptagrams, nonagons, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and a slice of pizza into that same round hole. We have been changed and fragmented by our collective trauma. And if we didn't fit into that round hole before, we definitely don't now. I've always said I wanted my legacy to be a lasting positive impact on the lives of those around me. For everyone I've touched to have grown or reflected, to have felt safe and loved because of our interactions. Little impacts, not world-rocking, celebrity-level Nobel Prize impacts. Those little things that can disrupt someone's bad day or negative view of themselves. So let's take a look at little impacts, small ways we can disrupt the status quo. I want to share with you some examples of little actions already in the works and some ideas for things yet to do. When my friend called me to ask if I would apply for a job at her school, it was for a position I had never heard of before, behavior specialist. It sounds pompous, I know. How do you specialize in behavior? How do you even get qualified to do something like that? Well, what I've learned as I try to be worthy of the title is that my job is to see students for who they could be while meeting them where they are. My tools of disruption are tools of reflection. It's like holding a mirror up to what people are saying and doing and asking if that's who they truly want to be. And I've cobbled together these tools through years of experiences and interactions with people smarter than me. Sometimes you read a concept in a book, and then you hear a particular phrase from a friend, and you learn a skill at a training. You look back and you see that they all fit together, and they build on each other. And you can use them to pave your own way. You can use this knowledge gifted from others to leave your own mark. In the process of distilling it and mixing it into something new, it becomes yours. And you can use it as a tool to create change, to disrupt. My husband and I spent a few years working as teaching parents at a group home for teen girls. We learned a lot about how to interact with people, mostly by doing it wrong. One of the lessons I carry with me is about the value of direct communication. We often soften our words in order to soften the impact of difficult conversations. But in the process, we muddy the message. Our desire to avoid challenging moments creates pathways to more challenging ones. And on the receiving end, we feel lonely or confused, and we miss the benefit of whatever the message was intended to be. I wonder what would happen if we stripped away the veil of indirectness and said exactly what we meant. Think about all the things you say in a day. The flippant remarks or backhanded compliments or jokes that don't land. If someone asked you in that moment what you meant, do you truly even know? Do you know not only the intention, but also the implication of your words? I think if we all stopped and said exactly what we meant, or were accountable for explaining ourselves, we would have much stronger relationships. I was struggling in a relationship with a very dear friend of mine because we were at such different points in our lives. I wanted to be there for her, but I also wanted to be true to myself. So I brought it up to my roommate, who was wise beyond her years. She suggested that I increase my vulnerability. Now, some of you hear that, and it makes your heart rate go up a little. because we are taught not to be vulnerable. We protect ourselves and our genetic line by minimizing or removing vulnerability. But when the people closest to us can't experience us in our unprotected forms, it means that they can't be vulnerable either. And more than preserving that lifelong relationship, that advice disrupted my whole perspective about vulnerability, leading to more authentic relationships in my work and personal life. With the students I work with, my vulnerability leads to their openness. I can model for them what it is to apologize and share regret and to work with my mistakes. My vulnerability makes it okay for them to be vulnerable too. And more than anything, this generation needs to learn how to form the bonds of relationship in a world that's so different from the one that I grew up in. They can't see how the globalization of technology is actually making their world much smaller, because the number of people that they connect with deeply, face-to-face, is a fraction of what it could be. I know that time and distance and screens and avatars can protect us from some forms of harm, but they also create barriers to true connection. And how do we disrupt these mostly virtual barriers? One of my colleagues is a disruptor simply by working at a school. He's an artist and a thinker, and we brought him on because I think we know we need more of what he has to offer. He and I were collaborating on some projects, and he came to me with an idea that I think is genius. He wanted to use conscious rap to positively influence the culture at school. And when I tried to help him navigate the world of school, to fit his box into our school schedule, fit his dream into the box of our school schedule, I failed. And he asked me why I was trying to put this powerful artistic moment into a bucket. Well, he was right. And I want to take a second to acknowledge that when someone is right in the face of your wrongness, it takes your breath away. There is a moment, sometimes a lifetime, when you are aghast or astonished, maybe defensive even. That moment right there is ripe for disruption. The seed is planted in the field of your own incompetence. And if you can tend it, then you can be part of change. But if you stomp it out, then you're stuck while the rest of the world moves on without you. I think we are afraid of what would happen if we admit to being wrong. But our fear of being left behind can be a more powerful motivator, a force for disrupting our mostly broken way of building relationships. Anyway, my coworker's bucket of cold water woke me to the fact that we don't have to fit into the mold. We are the adults in the building. Everyone says the education system is broken anyway. Instead of waiting for someone to fix it from the top, let's just shake it up a little bit, right here, down at the bottom. He can pull students. We can make the schedule. We decide what's important. He can pull students from class for this because these are life lessons he is teaching, and they are just as important as the math they are learning. He is using skills that we don't teach at school to help our students become better people. And we are learning how to use our powers for good. Now, I've talked to you about some little disruptions to the status quo in my small corner of the world. Some are tiny, anonymous things, like bathroom stall journalism with affirmations and good news. Others are based on the tools of reflection, like compassionate moments of holding boundaries. The teacher in me needs to leave you with some tools you can use, ways that you can reflect and disrupt and feed change. When we're talking about our personal relationships, I'd say put connection first. Create a list of helpful things to say, little things that resonate with you and seem to have an impact when you say them. Things like, that makes sense to me, or something seems hard about this. I know we can work through it together. Maybe some questions. What would feel helpful right now? Or will you tell me more about that? Get comfortable with saying, I'm sorry. It doesn't take anything from me to apologize for something that's harmed you. And when words fail you, sit with your people in silence, because simply being there has power beyond measure. When we're talking about disrupting harmful words and actions, counter them with helpful ones. Name meanness and hate when you see it, and ask if the person is okay. those tough emotions are almost always covering up wounds. Remember that moment I spoke of earlier when my wrongness was confronted with someone else's rightness? It's also powerful in reverse, but only if we meet it with compassion. Beating someone down with my rightness does not keep me on the right side. Patience and compassion are much more likely to lead to true change and vulnerability than anything else. Sometimes I like to say, I really want to hear you, but I'm having a hard time hearing what you're saying because of how you're saying it. Now, it's my job to work with the teenagers who frustrate adults the most. And it's not that they don't frustrate me, I'm no saint. But I do bring perspective with me to the table every time. There's always a reason why people do what they do. Either it's worked for them in the past, or they're avoiding something scarier, or they have mountains of trauma that have led to maladaptive coping. When you humanize a person, even if you don't know their story, it's like holding their hand while you're arguing. It's nearly impossible to yell at someone while you're holding their hand, because that connection is a tool for co-regulation and for empathy. So when someone's pushing all your buttons, take a minute to hold their hand, even if just in your imagination, and know that they have a story to tell that you may never hear. But by not feeding into fear and anger, you are disrupting a pattern that has been showing up in their lives, and you co-create opportunities for something new. Lastly, I want to touch on disrupting the machine. Now remember, I believe in small, direct impacts, not grand global approaches. But the machine, bureaucracy, patriarchy, is grand and global. So how can small disruptions create change in such a vast system? Because I really only need them to change my world. Now this is the seeds of a grassroots revolution, but all I am proposing is that we design our relationships and communities to serve us best. What I mean is that I can design change in my day-to-day life that makes me feel fulfilled, but you need to create your own life to serve you. I don't want to change the rules to the game to fit my needs, because what you need is going to be different. It's like how the little prince tends his planet, but his planet is the size of a house and has only one flower. I want to live my life to the best of my ability and let you do the same in your own way. And if you need me for something, or I can help guide you in some way, then I am here for it. So tend to your little planet. Make it just what you need it to be. Be clear and compassionate in your relationships. Find little ways to bring joy into your work and school life. Show up for the least among us and hold their hand. Ask for clarity. Make your own schedule. Flex your vulnerability. Hold a mirror up to you, your people, while you whisper in the background that they are worthwhile. And above all, plant the seeds of change in those moments when wrongness and rightness collide.